By 2013, we were pretty deep into Masters of the Universe classics, having done a ton of figures from the vintage line, from the Filmation show, Princess of Power, even new adventures. And coming up with new surprises for the fans was a bit of a challenge, especially when it came time to doing that 13th figure for subscribers only. Well, in 2013, a cool idea was pushed forward, and that was to do a character that sort of didn't really even have a name. Okay, well, he did, but this was the guy behind the guy. In other words, for every bad guy, or sometimes even good guy, there's an even worse bad guy behind the guy, right? The guy behind the guy, and that's exactly what the Unnamed One was. Now, this is a character who is only named once in the vintage material, in the very final mini-comic. Skeletor is having it out with King Hsss, and King Hsss mentions that he thinks Skeletor might be an emissary from the Unnamed One that the Snake Men serve. And that was about all we had to go off of. And coming up with a character who was sort of the leader or even creator of the Snake Men, the person who had sort of twisted their DNA together to create all the different variants of Snake Men, well, this was obviously a very powerful sorcerer. And a lot of people over the years, because the Unnamed One was mentioned in the mini-comic in '87, who this character could be, with guesses ranging all over the gambit. A lot of people thought it was Keldor, who was going to be part of the hero Powers of Grayskull line, but Keldor was his own character, and I actually did look through the archive, and there was no plans for Keldor to be the Unnamed One. This was just something fans sort of created in their own minds, or the same thing with Horde Prime being the Unnamed One. Again, that was never something that was considered back in the day. So when it came time to revealing the Unnamed One to the suspecting or unsuspecting fan base, well, we were going to have a little fun with that. We started off with mystery figures and mystery accessories early in the line, where characters like Triclops and Man-at-Arms came with accessories that weren't advertised in the promotional material. And the Unnamed One was kind of the culmination of this, to the point that when I sent a review sample out to Pixel Dan, not only did I cut the figure out of the cross-cell on the back and mutilate the bio so that it was kind of unreadable, but there was nothing in the package. And this ranged from fans being upset over this to thinking it was the coolest thing ever. It was all part of the fun. And Pixel Dan definitely plotted his revenge, threatening me with his feline warriors. Now, eventually, obviously, the Unnamed One had to be revealed, and this was really supposed to be about seeing this figure first in your mailbox and having that surprise.
I have no idea who this is.
Yeah, and that's kind of how a lot of fans felt. They weren't exactly expecting, I guess you could say, a Nether Orko or a Trollin. My exact instructions to the Horsemen was to essentially, the Unnamed One was a combination of Emperor Palpatine and Orko. And this is what they came up with when I gave them those instructions. This was their very first drawing at what the Unnamed One was going to look like, showing off as well all of his piece count and what possible reuse parts this character was going to have. It turned out there really weren't too many reuse parts. It was pretty much a 100% sculpted figure, but because it fell into that slot for a subscription-only character, we were kind of able to push it forward. So the Unnamed One made it out to everyone's mailboxes, and hopefully, for a lot of fans, the first time they actually saw this character and learned what he looked like, it was getting the toy in their hands. This was supposed to be, kind of part of the joy of collecting, that you could actually be surprised by something. And since we had a bio available, it gave us a chance to flesh out who this character actually was, even giving him the real name of Gorpo, which was Orko's original name in Filmation before they had to change it in order to have a letter that could be used without mirroring it, the G versus the O. So the Unnamed One was written in as sort of an ancient Trollin mage who had tried to steal the power of the universe, and then the Trollin Council took away his form and banished him. But he's back, baby! And yeah, exactly as I described to the Horsemen as being a combination of Emperor Palpatine and Orko, the idea was that the Unnamed One, aka Gorpo, I know, funny how the Unnamed One has a name, was a Trollin, just as Orko is a Trollin, just as, Uncle Mortok or Driel is a Trollin, and there are good guy Trollins and there's bad guy Trollins. The idea being that the Unnamed One was sort of this ultimate evil of Masters of the Universe, who had been lurking in the shadows, created the Snake Men, and the mystery of what Trollins looked like really sort of bled into this because we'd never even seen Orko or any other Trollan without their face mask or robes. So what a Trollan, what Orko or Driella or any of them looked like under their robes was a mystery, or at least it was a mystery for anyone who didn't buy the hardcover Filmation book that showed this image that was an official image but never actually got shown before of what Orko looked like without his hat. So yeah, he's just a blue little elf guy with, pointy ears and great yellow eyes. Now, to make the Unnamed One a little bit more bulked up and packaged, he got things like a giant snake energy blast, an alternate head, a magic wand, because, well, as a smaller character, much like Jawas and Orko himself, we wanted to make sure the price value was there. And he was brought back into the mini-comic continuity for classics quite a lot, especially as the comics went above and beyond what we originally expected of 3 issues, when we actually wound up doing 8 issues, and as we headed towards the 6th, 7th, and 8th issue, a new villain was needed, and it made sense to bring the Unnamed into that, commanding his new army of Revenge Squad members, including Mega Beast and Demo Man, as well as temporarily bringing back King Hsss in order to get information from him, before having the privilege of just destroying King Hsss all over again. It was kind of like a, fake out that the whole Snake Men were going to be back. He even made it to the cover of the last issue, being kind of cast as the arch enemy of Dare, son of He-Man, which was great because it was all part of pushing the brand forward and creating new characters, albeit in this case based on a character mentioned in the Vintage days. So a evil Orko is what you got, and finding ways to make him worth the price value, just like they did for the 2000X Orko, giving him giant energy balls and stands and staffs. And for those people who really wanted the Unnamed One to be a more, 6.5-inch scale character and not a smaller Trollan, there were really cool ways to do this, because we deliberately made sure that the heads and all of the armor for all of the figures in classics were swappable. And this was another long-term payoff, that if you decided that you wanted your own creative version of the Unnamed One, and whether or not you wanted this character to be a Trollan, or just an evil wizard, or, whatever, well, you had the ability to do that. And there were plenty of parts, plenty of body bucks, plenty of skin colors, capes, armors, all sorts of ways to do this. So it was definitely something that encouraged fans to have ownership of this character, but if you wanted the official version, well, that was available too. So it was definitely a take him or leave him, and some fans loved the concept and others not so much, both because of the mystery and the fact that it turned out to be an evil Orko when people were expecting it to be a giant monster. Although giant monsters usually aren't in charge. It really usually is like Yoda. It's like the little guy, right? Or Emperor Palpatine, the wizened old man. So they wind up being the threats or the guides, the person no one expects. That's part of mythology, and it's part of storytelling. So, including a mini-comic, an alternate head, a snake energy blast, and a magic wand was a way to plus up the figure who was otherwise smaller than most Masters of the Universe Classics figures, and price value was still very important, even though this was a subscription-only figure. And while a lot of people did like the helmeted head, and this was a creation of the Horsemen, it wasn't something I put in my original brief to them to do a second head. I loved that the way they came up with it, and it was, again, great, because we needed to find a way to plus up the value of this figure. So things like the stand, the alternate head, the energy blast were ways of making a physically smaller figure have the same value, the same perceived value as a larger figure. Now, while we tried to keep this figure secret, well, that was a little difficult, especially because of the way the toy industry works, and we were worried about whether or not a unit was going to be stolen or wind up online before we wanted it revealed. And this wound up happening. It turned out that someone who worked for a vendor of Mattel's vendor stole a figure. This was the person in charge of safety testing. So it wasn't even the vendor that was making it, but they had a vendor of the vendor. And it turned out that when he was busted, when he posted images of the Unnamed One, that the Hong Kong police raided his office and found storage units of millions of dollars of stolen Mattel property, mostly Hot Wheels. So while the Unnamed One was a bad guy, he wound up sort of being a hero for Mattel because he helped uncover this huge stolen toy ring that was going on, all because the guy running it wanted to put up pictures of the Unnamed One on the internet first. Craziness.